This week has seen an ungratifying skirmish in Victoria, arising from the fact that a group of neo-Nazis crashed a protest that had been organised to advocate for women's rights. Now let's be clear here, Nazism is repugnant, it's wrong, and it's an ugly stain wherever it goes. It is never okay. The Victorian Liberals, though, fell hard into a classic wedge politics move set up by Daniel Andrews and his friends in the left of the media. Their logic goes like this. A Liberal Member of Parliament helped organise a women's rights protest. A group of uninvited and unexpected neo-Nazis show up at the same time, protesting what are apparently different issues. Therefore, the Liberal Member of Parliament is a Nazi sympathiser. Have a look at what John Pesutto says.
It's not about freedom of speech, and it's not about women's rights and women's safety. The reason I'm taking action, Peter, is because Moira helped organise a protest that was organised with people who have shared platforms with people who have expressed Nazi sympathies or white supremacist views.
The facts matter here, and not all of the facts in Mr. Pesutto's statement are correct. But his reaction preceded a full understanding of what actually happened on the ground on the day. There are two tragedies arising from this. One, that a promising first-term upper house member, so recently endorsed by the electorate and who has given up her prior career and made great sacrifices to serve the public, now finds herself on the ropes in circumstances that are unjust. The other is that the real issue of the protest was the need for women's rights to be recognised as women. Not as people with uteruses or as chest feeders, but women. And the need for the protection of women's sports and spaces for reasons of safety and fair competition. And that's been glossed over. Kindness to people who struggle with their biological sex does not require the deletion of women from our lexicon and our environment. There is some real irony that the Labor Party, who, to use the left's language, play footsies with the pro-Palestine, anti-Israel movement, and often anti-Semitic movements like the boycott, divestment and sanction movement, have now suddenly got such strong feelings. Now, this movement is one that encourages people to starve Jewish-owned businesses, like, for instance, the Max Brenner chocolate shop chain that had to close about a dozen stores a while ago. It's a strategy of forcing economic pain on the Jewish people to make them capitulate to Palestine's demands. Let's hope that all of this manifests in better approaches now when it comes to policy affecting this nation's friends in Israel. And let's hope that cooler heads prevail in the Victorian Liberal Party room when it considers Moira Deeming's future tomorrow. All involved should take a close look at the facts before they find themselves responsible for a political own goal or on the receiving end of a defamation case. Now let's bring in our own panel. Andrew Cooper from CPAC and David Adler, the President of the Australian Jewish Association. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for your time. David, what's your take on the Victorian Women's Rights Rally and the events that have followed it?
Amanda, it's a tragic and disturbing development, and it is a disaster in terms of the sort of level of political discourse in this country. I actually got a call from one of the organisers at the end of their rally, very distressed that it had been crashed by neo-Nazis. Now, the added value we can bring to this discussion is to assure people that the messages that the women were trying to deliver, which is about protecting the integrity of women's sport, protecting the integrity of private spaces like change rooms and bathrooms, etc., those messages have exactly zero to do with Nazism. So it is dreadful that it has been overtaken by this very low level and opportunistic leverage of Nazism. And let me just make one more point, that to do so actually is disrespectful to the Jewish community. It dishonours the real victims of Nazism, our Holocaust survivors and those that suffered so much during World War II and the Holocaust. And to use this for domestic political point scoring is despicable. And both Dan Andrews and John Pesutto, I must say, I have a very low opinion of the way both of them have conducted themselves in this.
Andrew, CPAC helped to organise the tour of Kelly J. Keane, around whom the rally was organised. What do you make of the accusation that she has some connection to Nazi sympathisers?
Well, it's clearly ridiculous, Amanda, and I think David put that proposition to bed. Knowing Kelly J, it's just a ridiculous concept to think that a mother of four, a modern-day feminist, would be snuggling up to Nazis. I mean, it's absurd, right? So we shouldn't even give that any more time than that we've already given it. I think what's come out of that weekend was that we've learnt perhaps three things. We've learnt that the left no longer care about women's opinions. It's been trumped by the opinions of trans. We've learnt also that John Pesutto has no idea of what his party is supposed to stand for. And we've also learnt that the major beneficiary of Nazis turning up to an event is in fact the authoritarian jackboot-wearing Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews. He is the one that weaponises Nazis. He is the one, in the end, that encourages Nazis to turn up at events because he gives them oxygen and he uses them to berate those with opinions that he doesn't like. He is the one that's, in my opinion, responsible for a lot of this ridiculous pantomime that goes on at these events at this day and age. And I think, in my mind, he is the one that's essentially dispensing with the rule of law and introducing mob rule. Basically, it's mob law here, and when the mob turns up, they can shut down whoever they like these days.
David, if Ms Deeming is expelled from the party tomorrow, it sends a signal that it's no longer safe to have open community events as a politician, because who knows who could show up at them.
Exactly.
And if you get tarred with their brush, then that's a political risk. Doesn't genuine community engagement mean being willing to speak with, but also to disagree with, people from all walks of life without pre-vetting them before they walk in the room?
Indeed, Amanda. You couldn't hold a public event of almost any type because you never know who might turn up. You might be in an event at a speaking and some obnoxious group turns up, and therefore you are smeared as being associated with this obnoxious group. I mean, the ridiculousness of this, if I can take up one of Andrew's points, Dan Andrews has form. Don't forget that before the last Victorian state election, he smeared political opponents by alleging they were preferencing Nazis. He did this to the Liberal Party. He didn't provide any names or any evidence, but again, he leveraged the idea of Nazism for political point scoring. We might also observe that within the last week, the World Athletics, headed by Lord Sebastian Coe, has actually made a very powerful decision that they would preserve women's sport for biological women. So I'm waiting for someone in Melbourne, be it Dan Andrews or John Pesutto or one of their supporters, to allege that Sebastian Coe is a Nazi or that World Athletics is a Nazi party. Obviously ridiculous, but this is the level of debate that we're having currently as a result of the protest and the reactions to it. It's dreadful. I think it does neither party any good, and the leaders should be condemned for using this for their political point scoring.
What happened, and why does it matter?
Well, I mean, I spoke to Kelly J just before she left for New Zealand, and she said she was getting, in Canberra at that stage, and she said she was getting police escorts wherever she went in Canberra because of the potential for violence. She lands in New Zealand, attempts to attend a rally, and gets absolutely mobbed by a violent, hysterical group of people that were clearly intent on shutting her down, not allowing those that wish for her to speak and for them to listen, and not allowing her freedom to speak, not allowing her woman's right to speak, which is essentially what the whole tour is about. And they shut her down. In fact, someone squirted sauce all over her, and in the end, the police said, "Well, look, we're going to have to escort you off the premises here, out of the park, because there's there's potential that you can be hurt here." And so she's had to leave, and this is presented as a victory by the mob, right? And instead of the police, the authorities, standing up for the principle of free speech, they're actually caving into the mob. And this is also a very troubling development that's happening. I run CPAC, and every year we get protesters, and every year the police ring me and say, "You've got to pay us money to run CPAC, or we shut you down." Now, it's just absurd. This is pandering to violent mobs, and it's something that I think in a modern-day liberal democracy, we've just got to be very careful. This is going to get off the leash and get out of control.
It is quite bizarre that the people who are being targeted for violence are expected to pay for police support, rather than the people who misbehave taking responsibility for the havoc they cause. David, Labor are pretty high and mighty this week around casting this smear of Nazism, but too many of their own members have pretty strong ties to the arguably anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel movements like the BDS. Help my viewers understand the breadth of that problem.
It is a significant problem. We saw it on display at the last federal conference of the Labor Party, where they adopted a platform of recognising a state of Palestine. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the moderates in the party, like Michael Danby and a couple of others, wanted to have some preconditions put into the policy. For example, recognising that Israel has a right to exist, but also disavowing violence and terrorism. And those moderates were not allowed to even speak. They weren't allowed to put their amendments, even have them defeated. We had Michael Danby censored and shut down. He was very hot and condemned Penny Wong and others who steered that policy through. And if you want to see where Nazism ideology is on open display today, occasionally with protests that we see in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, which is also known as the West Bank, you see, there's no secret of it. They fly the swastika. And on their social media, they're praising Hitler, they're calling for mass murder, etc. So I think it is the ultimate hypocrisy that on the one hand, they'll smear the women who are calling for their rights, but on the other, they're embracing an ideology, a culture that is probably the closest thing that we have today to Nazism. And I don't know where this will go. We're worried that some of the moderates have been removed from the parliamentary party, both at state and federal levels, and Labor could be at a tipping point on these issues.
Well, let's hope people like Michael Danby can have the necessary influence for common sense to prevail. Thank you so much, David Adler and Andrew Cooper, for your time and for your